December 1908, Tucson, Arizona. Families across the city started finding packages on their doorsteps wrapped in what they thought was brown twine. When Martha Caldwell cut through the binding on Christmas morning, the material didn't snap like rope. It pulled apart in threads. Long, silken threads. The kind that only grows from a human scalp. By New Year's Day, 17 families had received these gifts. By January 10th, 4 people were dead. The packages began appearing in early December. Small bundles, no bigger than a shoebox, left on porches throughout the Mexican and Anglo neighborhoods near the old Presidio wall. Deputy Marshal Thomas Webb documented the first discovery in his report dated December 8, 1908. Webb wrote that Mrs. Elena Vasquez of Simpson Street found a package on her step at dawn. She brought it inside, assuming a neighbor had left her baked goods or preserves, as was common during the holiday season. The package was wrapped in brown paper and bound with what appeared to be thick cord. When she unwrapped it, she found a small wooden box containing dried herbs and a crudely carved wooden figure, the binding material she'd set aside. Only later did she examine it closely. The cord was braided human hair, 3 strands twisted together, black, brown, and gray. Mrs. Vasquez took the binding to Deputy Webb the following morning. In his report, Webb noted the material appeared to be genuine human hair, approximately 18 inches in length when unbraided, and showed signs of professional technique in the braiding. The wooden figure inside the box resembled no saint or religious icon Webb recognized. The herbs included desert sage and creosote bush, common plants in the Sonoran Desert surrounding Tucson. Within 3 days, 6 more packages appeared across the city, all wrapped in brown paper, all bound with braided human hair, all containing wooden boxes with carved figures and desert herbs. Dr. Samuel Hartwell of the Pima County Medical Society examined the hair bindings on December 11th. His notes, preserved in the Society's minutes, describe hair samples from 7 different packages. Each binding contained hair of varying colors and textures, suggesting multiple sources. What troubled Dr. Hartwell most was the condition of the hair. Fresh, recently cut, still retaining natural oils. In the tight-knit community of Tucson, population barely 5,000 in 1908, news spread quickly. Deputy Webb began interviewing recipients. Maria Santos received a package. So did the widow Catherine O'Donnell. The baker Augustus Brichta found one at his shop. Judge Henry Marks discovered one on his courthouse desk. The recipients had nothing obvious in common. Different ages, different backgrounds, different parts of town. Some were wealthy, others barely scraped by. Some attended the Catholic mission of San Xavier del Bac. Others worshipped at the Methodist Church on Stone Avenue. Webb could find no pattern. On December 14th, a local boy named Timothy Fletcher came forward with information. The 13-year-old told Deputy Webb he'd seen a man leaving packages on doorsteps near the Santa Cruz River. Timothy described the man as tall and thin, dressed in clothes that seemed too big for his frame. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low and carried a canvas sack over his shoulder. Timothy followed the man at a distance. The stranger walked with a limp, favoring his left leg. He moved through the adobe neighborhoods like he knew the streets well. Timothy watched him place a package on the doorstep of the Mendoza family, then disappear down an alley toward the edge of town. Deputy Webb organized a search party. They followed the path Timothy described, heading south and west toward the desert foothills. The trail led them to a small dwelling built into the base of Sentinel Peak, what locals called a mountain. The structure wasn't much. Adobe walls patched with desert clay, a roof of ocotillo ribs and canvas. No door, just a blanket hanging across the entrance. Inside, Webb found a space barely large enough for a man to lie down. A bedroll in one corner, a small fire pit, and along one wall, something that made Webb step back. 53 braids of human hair hung from pegs driven into the adobe, each braid carefully labeled with a paper tag. The tags bore names: Maria Ortega, John Sullivan, Chen Wei, Sarah Blackburn, Names Webb recognized. Residents of Tucson, some living, some dead for years. Among the hair, Webb found tools, scissors, a straight razor, glass bottles containing oils, a wooden comb with teeth worn smooth, and in a tin box, more of the carved wooden figures, dozens of them, each one slightly different from the others, but no Hermit. The dwelling appeared abandoned, though the fire pit held warm ashes. Webb confiscated everything, the braids, the tools, the figures. He brought them back to town and stored them in the marshal's office. That night, the office caught fire. The blaze started in the evidence room. By the time the volunteer fire brigade arrived, everything Webb had collected was ash. The fire marshal, Robert Chen, filed a report stating the cause as accidental. An oil lamp knocked over. But Chen noted something odd in his report. The fire burned hot enough to melt the iron lock on the evidence room door, yet the wooden desk 3 feet away showed minimal damage. The burn pattern made no sense. After the fire, the packages stopped appearing. For a week, Tucson returned to normal. Deputy Webb continued his investigation, but with no evidence and no suspect, the trail went cold. Then people started getting sick. On December 22nd, Catherine O'Donnell collapsed in her home. Dr. Hartwell examined her and found her burning with fever. She spoke in fragments, mentioning the package, the carved figure, the smell of the herbs. Hartwell noted in his medical log that Mrs. O'Donnell's symptoms didn't match any illness he recognized. High fever, yes, but also vivid hallucinations and patches of her hair falling out in clumps. By Christmas Eve, 3 more package recipients reported similar symptoms. Maria Santos, Augustus Brichta, Thomas Chen, brother of the fire marshal. Hartwell consulted with every doctor in Tucson. They considered typhoid, influenza, even the plague. But the symptoms didn't quite fit, and only the people who'd received packages were falling ill. On Christmas Day, Martha Caldwell unwrapped her package. She found the wooden box, the carved figure, the herbs. She showed them to her husband Robert, who worked as a clerk for the Southern Pacific Railroad. Robert suggested they burn the contents, get rid of them. They threw everything into their fireplace that evening. The next morning, both Martha and Robert woke with the fever. Dr. Hartwell began documenting a pattern. Every person who opened their package fell ill within 48 hours. The sickness progressed in stages. First the fever, then the hallucinations, then the hair loss. By the 4th day, most patients couldn't speak. They stared at nothing, pupils wide, breathing shallow. Catherine O'Donnell died on December 28th. Maria Santos followed on the 29th. By New Year's Day, the death count reached 4. Deputy Webb renewed his search for the Hermit. He brought in help from the Territorial Marshal's office in Phoenix. They scoured the desert around Sentinel Peak. They found nothing but the abandoned dwelling, now empty of even the bedroll. On January 2nd, a rancher named Hiram Walsh came forward. Walsh owned land south of town, near the old Spanish mission. He told Deputy Webb about a man who'd been living on the edge of his property for months. Tall, thin, limping. The man never spoke when Walsh encountered him, just nodded and moved on. Walsh said the man spent his time collecting things. Bundles of desert grass, pieces of broken pottery, and once, Walsh saw the man sitting under a mesquite tree, braiding something that looked like rope. The description matched. Webb rode out to Walsh's ranch with a search party. They found evidence of recent occupation, a fire ring, scraps of cloth, indentations in the dirt where someone had slept. But again, no Hermit. What they did find turned Webb's stomach. A bag hidden under a pile of rocks. Inside, 62 locks of hair, each tied with a strip of cloth. Some of the locks were clearly fresh. Others had the dry, brittle quality of old hair. Webb recognized some of the cloth strips. They matched fabric from dresses and shirts that had gone missing from clotheslines around Tucson over the past year. Small thefts no one had connected until now. Dr. Hartwell examined the hair samples. In his notes dated January 4th, 1909, He wrote that the hair came from multiple individuals: men, women, children. The cutting technique suggested someone with experience. Clean cuts at the root. No pulling or tearing. Hartwell made another observation. Several of the locks matched hair from people who'd recently died. Natural deaths, mostly. Old age, illness, accidents. But someone had taken hair from these people post-mortem. Hartwell noted that traditional Mexican burial customs in Tucson sometimes involved cutting a lock of hair as a keepsake. If someone had access to bodies before burial, they could have collected these samples. The question became, who? Who had this access? Who possessed the skill to cut hair cleanly? Who knew the desert well enough to survive on its edges? A name emerged from interviews with elderly residents of the Mexican Quarter: Joaquin Salazar, a barber who'd worked in Tucson for 30 years until his shop burned down in 1906. After the fire, Salazar disappeared. People assumed he'd moved on to Phoenix or Nogales, but a few remembered seeing him around town after that, moving through the streets at odd hours, never stopping to talk. Webb found property records showing Salazar had owned a small shop on Meyer Street. The building stood empty now, but when Webb forced entry, he found the back room still set up as living quarters. A cot, a wash basin, and on a shelf, glass bottles containing oils similar to those found in the desert dwelling. On the wall above the cot, someone had drawn a map of Tucson in charcoal, X marks scattered across it. Webb counted the marks: 17. The exact number of packages delivered. Beneath the map, a single phrase written in Spanish: para equilibrar las cuentas, to balance the accounts. Webb's investigation expanded. He dug into Salazar's history. What he uncovered explained nothing and everything at once. Joaquin Salazar arrived in Tucson in 1876. He set up his barbershop and served the community for 3 decades. He cut hair, he shaved faces, he listened to people's stories. According to old-timers Webb interviewed, Salazar was well-liked, friendly, generous. He often reduced his prices for the poor. But in 1905, something changed. Salazar's wife, Rosa, fell ill. Dr. Hartwell's predecessor treated her for what he diagnosed as consumption. She died in February 1906, 3 months before the fire that destroyed Salazar's shop. After Rosa's death, people noticed Salazar becoming withdrawn. He still worked, but the conversation dried up. He went through the motions, cutting hair in silence. Then came the fire. The official report blamed an overturned stove, but a witness, never formally interviewed, told Webb something different. The witness, an elderly woman named Esperanza Cruz, said she saw Salazar standing outside his burning shop, watching it burn. He wasn't trying to save anything. He was just watching. After that night, Salazar vanished from public life. Now, in January 1909, Webb tried to piece together what happened in the 3 years since. The hermit existence, the collecting of hair, the carved figures and packages. What was Salazar trying to accomplish? Dr. Hartwell offered a theory in a letter to the Territorial Medical Board. He suggested Salazar might have been attempting some form of sympathetic magic, a practice he'd read about in anthropological texts. The use of personal items, like hair, to create connections with specific individuals. The herbs and carved figures could be elements of a curse or hex, but Hartwell admitted this was speculation. The actual cause of the illnesses remained unknown. Some patients had recovered after the 4th day, others continued to decline. On January 8th, Deputy Webb received a telegram from the marshal's office in Phoenix. A body had been found in the desert outside the city. Male, approximately 60 years old, dead. For at least a week. The description matched Joaquin Salazar. Webb traveled to Phoenix to confirm the identification. The body showed signs of exposure and dehydration. The coroner estimated death had occurred around December 30th, roughly the time the last package recipients began falling ill. But what struck Webb most was what they found with the body. Salazar had been carrying a satchel. Inside, 17 small wooden boxes, empty, and one final braid of human hair. This one different from the others. It combined strands of every color: black, brown, gray, red, blonde, all twisted together in a complex pattern Webb had never seen before. The final braid was still tied around Salazar's own wrist. Webb returned to Tucson with more questions than answers. The illness that had struck package recipients began to fade. By mid-January, all surviving patients had recovered, though each reported the same lingering effect. Their hair never grew back where it had fallen out. Small bald patches remained, permanent reminders of whatever had afflicted them. The wooden figures from the packages were never recovered after the marshal's office fire, but families who'd received them reported strange occurrences before they burned them or threw them away. The figures seemed to shift position when no one was looking. Some people claimed they felt warm to the touch, even when left in cold rooms. Deputy Webb filed his final report on January 20th, 1909. He documented the timeline of events, the victims, the investigation. He noted Salazar's death and the recovery of the empty boxes, but he couldn't provide a satisfactory explanation for what had happened or why. The case closed. Officially, 4 people died from an unknown illness in late 1908. Joaquin Salazar, former barber, perished in the desert. Cause of death determined as natural. The packages, the hair bindings, the carved figures became footnotes in Tucson's history. But something else appeared in Webb's report, something he added in the margin of the last page. A note about an interview he conducted on January 18th with Father Miguel Ruiz of the San Xavier Mission. Father Ruiz told Webb that Rosa Salazar, Joaquin's wife, had come to him before her death. She was troubled by something her husband had told her. Joaquin believed he'd been stealing life force from his customers. Every time he cut someone's hair, he said, he was taking part of their spirit. He'd kept samples from every person he'd ever barbered, thousands of locks of hair, stored in the back room of his shop. Rosa feared her husband was losing his mind. Father Ruiz told her to pray for him. When Rosa died, all those hair samples burned in the shop fire. Thousands of them. Joaquin Salazar lost his wife and 30 years of collected hair in the span of 3 months. Father Ruiz believed Salazar went into the desert to build it all back, to reclaim what he thought he'd lost. The 17 packages weren't random. Each recipient had been barbered by Salazar in the final year before his shop burned down. The last customers he'd served before losing everything. Webb noted Father Ruiz's interpretation but drew no conclusions. The report simply ended there, filed away in the territorial archives. Tucson moved on. The adobe neighborhoods around the Presidio wall continued to grow. The city expanded south and east. The Hermit's dwelling at the base of Sentinel Peak weathered away, reclaimed by the desert. But in 1947, during a construction project near the old marshal's office site, workers unearthed something peculiar: a metal box buried 3 feet deep, sealed with wax. Inside, they found what appeared to be evidence from the 1908 investigation: braids of human hair, somehow preserved despite the reported fire. 53 of them, each still bearing its paper tag with a name. The workers turned the box over to the Tucson Police Department. The department filed it as historical evidence and stored it in their archives. Last month, during a routine inventory, an archivist noticed something odd about the box. The hair inside wasn't brittle or degraded. It looked as fresh as the day it was braided. And the paper tags, yellowed with age, now bore additional writing beneath the original names. Dates. Dates from 1909 to 1947. Dates matching the death records of every person whose name appeared on the tags. The box has been sealed pending further investigation, but 3 archivists who handled the contents before the sealing have reported the same symptom. Small patches of their hair are falling out, and they wake each night from dreams about a man with a limp, standing in the desert, braiding something in his hands. Something that looks like rope, but moves like it's still alive.